Take a little trip with me way back to 2011. There was a great YouTube video that was making the rounds among my friends on social media featuring a trombone player who was waiting for a gig. This video is called Last Call. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to pause this lesson and click down into the description. I'll put the link there so you can see what's going on. Now, I won't spoil the video for you, but the gist of it is that there's a trombone player waiting diligently to get the call from some band leader to hire this trombone player for a gig. Surely we've all been in this situation where we're kind of waiting for that phone to ring, hoping to fill up our calendar. But today's lesson, we're going to cover how we can be more proactive and how we can get more gigs as trombone players. Now, if you're watching this when I first post this here in early 2021, we're still in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, I was kind of thinking, well, hopefully within 6 to 8 to 12 months, we might be on the other side of this. And for us musicians, we might be back to performing and working on a more regular basis. This really led me to consider some of the things that I need to do in order to sort of rebuild my business, reestablish connections with other musicians, with venues, all that type of stuff so I can hit the ground running. Now, if you're viewing this in the future, all of these things still hold true that we are going to talk about today. They're just good practices towards filling up your calendar as a working musician. Now, everything we're going to talk about today is just based on my own experience from my career, from the career of other musicians I know, and I am certainly not famous or anybody. I am 100% nobody, but I've always been able to fill up my calendar with great playing, writing, teaching opportunities in order to make a living as a full-time musician. It's also important to remember, I have never lived in one of the major music hubs in America. I've never lived in Nashville or LA or New York. I've lived in several medium-sized cities throughout the Midwest. However, I've always been able to find work, even as a trombonist. And that's an instrument that we don't always think of as the easiest to book in different bands. In addition, all this advice that I give you today assumes that your playing is sort of on the level. You can play in tune, in time, with a good sound, relatively versatile. Yeah, maybe you have styles that you feel more at home in, but you are somebody who, when the call comes, you can take the gig. It also assumes that your professionalism is at least relatively on point. You know how to show up on time to a gig and handle all that sort of stuff as well. All right, so let's get into it. The first thing you can do in order to get more gigs as a trombone player is be cool. Yeah, I know. Gig, please. Now, when I say be cool, I don't mean whatever that guy was doing. He was actually probably doing the opposite of what you need to do. When I say be cool, I just mean be a person that other people feel comfortable being around. Whether you like it or not, the music business is a business that is built on relationships. And it's not going to be the fact that you're the greatest trombone player in the world that is going to get you work. It's going to be the relationships you have with your fellow musicians and how you can leverage those into them calling you and them referring you to other work opportunities. There's a few really concrete things you can do to help in this area. The first is just to make the hang. So if you're on a performance and it's between the sound check and the gig, everybody's maybe going to have a drink or going to get dinner, go with them. Even if you don't know them, just ask, hey, you mind if I tag along? They're most likely going to say yes. And then you can get to know those individuals, and you don't need to go to like force yourself on them or really like try to get to know them. You just need to go and be present and let those conversations happen naturally. Once those musicians see that, oh, so-and-so can play, oh, they're easy to get along with, they show up on time, they have a good attitude, they will call you and pass your name along for future things. In the same vein, if there are musicians in town that you want to play with, go to their shows. That seems so obvious, but this is something that I think is so lacking in every single city that I've lived in. Younger musicians or musicians who maybe don't work as much, you never see them out on the nights when they're not working. And the people who do work a lot of times they're out making the hang. They're checking stuff out. They're seeing their friends play. This is how you become part of a community of musicians, and this is how you fill up your calendar. Now, you don't need to go out with the effort of, I'm going to go get a gig. And actually, for most people, that comes across in the wrong way and it'll actually probably work against you. You just want to go, meet the different people, just be present on the scene, and the work will follow. This idea of being cool is a lesson I have had to learn over and over and over throughout my career. I am not naturally the most easygoing person, and especially in a rehearsal or a sound check, if time is getting wasted or things are going off the rails, sometimes I can get a little bit stressed out, and that just kills the vibe instantly, and nobody wants to work with somebody like that. So there are definitely times where this component has cost me work, and I'm always trying to working to be more easygoing, and if it's not something that I have direct control over or I'm a sideman, I just try to let it roll off my back. Now, there are places where you do have to say something for sure, but for small things like maybe a singer not showing up on time, the sound check is in 5 minutes, the drummer hasn't set up, just let it roll off your back and kind of go with the flow. It will really pay off in the end. All right, the second way that you can book more gigs as a trombone player is by making yourself an asset to the musicians that you play with. Ask yourself, am I a good writer? Am I a good producer, organizer, or booker? Do I do something as simple as play piano well? Am I a good kind of entertainer or kind of hype person? All of these things are assets that you can bring to the different musicians that you work with. Very rarely is somebody going to hire you just because you play trombone. There are very small amounts of gigs in that way. However, if you do some of these other things really well, you can increase not only the types of work you're doing, but just the different musicians who want to work with you. Yeah, maybe somebody doesn't need a trombone player for every one of their gigs, but maybe they're recording an album and they want some horns on that album. They might have already considered hiring a trombone player, but suddenly if they find out that you're a great arranger and you really know how to work in the studio, suddenly not only can you write their arrangements for them, but maybe you can also play on those recordings, and then you develop that relationship with them for future opportunities. I know for me, a lot of the work I've done throughout the years has come from that area, from sort of the writing and arranging for particularly horn sections for kind of rock and funk bands, but also having some like bass piano skills has helped me book a lot of work in cover bands and wedding bands. And while yes, that's maybe not my primary thing I want to be doing with my playing talents, it certainly helps to pay the bills on a Friday or Saturday night when I might not be playing a jazz gig. The third thing you can do to help increase the number of gigs that you play is stop looking for just trombone gigs. I've been practicing this excerpt for 20 years. Why don't I get more gigs? Clearly, this sort of connects to the last point, but if you just look for trombone gigs, you're probably going to be limiting yourself to playing in an orchestra or playing in big bands. That is a very limiting spectrum of types of performances that you can do, especially if you're trying to make a living, because for the most part, while those are great gigs, and I love playing in big bands and things like that, people tend to hold on to those opportunities because they're oftentimes a very low investment that the musicians have to do to get that work once they have it. If you're in an orchestra or you're a regular member of a big band, you're not booking the gigs, you're not organizing, you're showing up, you're playing, and you're getting paid. Who wouldn't want a gig like that? But unfortunately, that also means that they stay relatively closed for oftentimes a long time. If you can expand beyond those sort of typical trombone gigs, you can increase the amount of work that you can do. Remember, you're a horn player, you're an entertainer, you're an artist, you're a creative individual, and so make the trombone part of that. Regardless of the style of music you play, your job is to make listeners and the other musicians take you seriously by your playing and your conduct in general. And just because you play an instrument that is sometimes not at the forefront of many styles doesn't mean that it can't be, and it's just up to you to figure out how to make that work. All right, the final thing you can do in order to help yourself have more playing opportunities, in some ways is the most challenging but can be the most rewarding. That is to create those opportunities yourself. Now, obviously, this is the one that in some ways is the hardest path to follow because it takes a lot of investment, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of money to get your own thing off the ground. It can be the most rewarding from an artistic standpoint. However, it can also be rewarding from a financial standpoint if you look at it in the right way. Nothing will help you fill up your calendar more than hiring other musicians and developing the relationships with them in this sort of back and forth work environment. Be the impetus for projects as a leader, as an arranger, as a contractor, as an organizer, as a referrer. Once you have these relationships established in sort of you're hiring so-and-so, they need a trombone player for a project, they're gonna hire you back. And not that either of you is really thinking that you owe the other one something, you're just becoming part of the community. Again, it comes back to relationships, but if you're the leader, a lot of times you have the power to start those relationships or really make those relationships more fulfilling for all parties. All right, there's a couple things you can do to help build your calendar even as a trombone player, often the last call horn player in most situations. Whether you're thinking about coming out of COVID or you're viewing this in the future and you're just thinking, man, I've got to build up my gig schedule in order to make a living. Hopefully these things help you. The biggest thing to take away here is it's all about relationships, finding different ways to build relationships with musicians, with booking agents, with the audience will really get you somewhere when you're trying to maintain this career as a sustainable path.